I do a lot of work with rural communities, primarily in Wisconsin, around economic development. And one of the things that I've noticed is that there's been this kind of sea change shift in moving away from thinking about economic development in terms of jobs, 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 and more in terms of people, people, people. And a lot of our economic development policies are crafted around businesses and jobs. So the idea was to kind of look at how we have historically approached economic development and try to recast it in terms of where a lot of communities there are right now. And that is people, people, people. Within the planning literature, um, it's talked about in terms of placemaking. I tried to recast it in terms of kind of the waves of economic development, which is the way that a lot of economic development practitioners think of. So this notion of the fourth wave is really moving beyond simply focusing on jobs, 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 and businesses to thinking about people. The idea behind the research was kind of to document how the drivers of the economy have changed. The framework that I used was kind of the old question of do people follow jobs or do jobs follow people? And it's not either or, it's both and, but there's been a shift over time to where jobs following people is becoming a little bit more prevalent. And what are the policy implications of that? And what can communities do if indeed that is a kind of a fundamental shift in the economy? And that was the motivation for the work, and really trying the objective of the work was to try to document that and to provide suggestions to policymakers and practitioners in this kind of new paradigm. This notion of the fourth wave implies that there are previous waves. And the first wave of economic development is what a lot of folks still kind of that is economic development, and that's industrial recruitment. And industrial recruitment is through forms of come to our community, come to our state because we have lower operating costs, we have cheap labor, we have lower taxes, we have limited regulations, and that's a positive business climate. A lot of the attention on that is recruitment, generally manufacturing, bigger firms. But the research suggests that a lot of the job growth is coming from existing businesses and particularly new businesses, entrepreneurship. And so we saw a lot of communities shift away from recruitment to focusing on entrepreneurship and small business development. That's kind of the second wave. A lot of communities did that in a kind of a shotgun approach. And the work of Michael Porter and his work on clusters really drew attention to this idea that you need to be a little bit more strategic. You need to think about what is kind of what kind of industries are you really good at? Is your region really got a comparative advantage? And you should be focusing on that. That's kind of the third wave. And two things that came out of that third wave. One is, of course, being more strategic and kind of focused on your efforts. But the second is that this notion of the private sector and the public sector working together, so these public-private partnerships became more prevalent. And the other thing that I saw across Wisconsin, for example, where I do a lot of my work, is that communities that had once been competitors under the first wave of economic development now realized that they were kind of all in the same boat together. That individual communities were part of a larger economy and that they really needed to work together. So we started to see these regional partnerships start to form, and that's the third wave. But all of those are focused on jobs and businesses. And this shift to being more people focused is this introduction of the fourth wave. The focus of the paper, again, was to try to provide a historical perspective of how states and communities have gone about economic development. And this framework of, part of it is our understanding of the economy has changed, has evolved, but also the nature of the economy has changed. I mean, there are structural changes in the economy that are influencing how communities should go about economic development. And the shift was this idea of do people follow jobs or do jobs follow people? And there's a framework that's out there. It's the old Carlino-Mills framework um, that's been around for a number of years. And it's been kind of within the academic literature, that framework has become kind of a workhorse for those of us that want to understand economic growth processes. And there's a nice framework using that to ask the question, what does the data say? Does the data suggest this idea that people follow jobs, which has certain policy implications, or is it more that jobs follow people? Well, it turns out it's not either or, it's both and but the magnitude of the relationships has been shifting over time. So I kind of looked from the 1970s up to 2000. Well, 2019, I didn't use 2020 because of COVID. Um, and you can kind of see this shift in that relationship over time to where jobs follow people is becoming more predominant. Now, one of the things that we did with the study is that we allowed for some spatial variation in that. How does that relationship look across the country? And you do find that where we're at, what physical space are we within the US can influence that. Some parts of the US, people follow jobs is still pretty dominant, but there are other parts of the US where the jobs follow people is more dominant. So this idea that, we can make these blanket generalizations, we really need to be careful about that because what might be true for, say, New England may not be true for the Mississippi Delta or the upper Midwest or the Pacific Northwest. That local context really matters. It matters a lot. And the research methodologies that we used in this study, we were able to kind of document that. And the policy recommendations really is that we need to think about economic development in a broader context than simply jobs, 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 and businesses. That our laser focus on jobs, jobs, jobs is perhaps limiting what we can actually do to enhance the economic well-being of citizens, of local residents, and that we need to think in a broader context. We need to be thinking about why this community and not another community. Historically, it was thought about in terms of taxes and regulations and labor costs and land costs and things like that. But increasingly, it's quality of life. Why would a young professional family want to pick one community over another community in order to where to live and work, or perhaps start a business? And notions of quality of life really start to come into play. We want to, and the implication here, for example, is that we want to invest in quality schools, not just to produce labor for the labor force, but also because it will be attractive to people. People will pick a community that has really good schools. We want to invest in things like, say, a farmer's market, not just to provide a market for local farmers, but also it adds to the quality of life of the community. We want to invest in um, things like arts fairs because it adds to the dynamics of the community. Um, there's one community that I work with that has that just recently had an old hardware store converted into a small brew pub. And this is a town of about 5,000 people. And they have a little brew pub, and that they're bringing in live entertainment on the weekends, and the community has just embraced it. The live entertainment may not be very good, but it's a gathering place. It's investing in the arts, and that community has embraced that little business and is doing everything that they can to make sure that that business is successful. So it's kind of a both and, not an either or. We're trying to promote a local business. We're trying to help that business be profitable and grow. but it's also adding to the quality of life of the community. More and more communities are thinking that way. How can this business not just provide jobs, but how can this business make this a better place to live? And that is the fundamental shift. And more communities are embracing that.